Welcome to The Lava Spurt, the weekly offshoot of the Lava Flow. Channeling the flow of information to the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and agorist community. Brought to you by my per-episode donors. Thank you. Here's your host, Rodger Paxton.
Riley Blake had me on his podcast, Anarcho Agenda. It was episode number 73 last week, and we had a great conversation. We talked about Porcfest, New Hampshire, and so many other topics. It was a really great conversation. I wanted to thank Riley for having me on the show and sit down and relax and listen to our conversation. I hope you guys enjoy this.
Coming up on episode 73 of Anarcho Agenda, I sit down with Rodger Paxton and we discuss New Hampshire, Porcfest, and much, much more coming up on Anarcho Agenda. This podcast is covered by the BIPCOT No Government License. This allows for use and reuse by anyone except for governments and or government agents. Learn more at bipcot.org. I have listened to a lot of libertarian podcasts, and one podcast I like in particular is the Lava Flow podcast, hosted by Rodger Paxton. Rodger is joining me on episode 73 of Anarcho Agenda. Welcome, Rodger.
Hi, good to be here.
What got you into podcasting?
Well, it's actually a pretty funny story. One of my best libertarian friends in the world is a guy named Chris Spangle, who I met in 2011 at the Libertarian State Leadership Alliance convention in Columbus. And he had a podcast, or still does, called We Are Libertarians. And, I listened to it because it was one of the first real libertarian podcasts. And, frankly, and I have told him this a million times, that his podcast kind of sucked. And I knew I could do better than that. And so I did. I created the kind of podcast that I would want to listen to, one that, doesn't have a lot of fluff, a lot of chit chat, just something that gets in, gives you the information you need, and gets out. And so that's why I started it.
Has your podcast been really successful?
It has. I mean, I wish I could put into words how thankful I am for the listeners. I mean, my numbers just continue to rise, month over month. I had 40,000 downloads, or right at 40,000 downloads last month. And that was with me taking a couple of weeks off to finish up dealing with Porcfest stuff. And as of today, I've gone up another $12.50 per episode from supporters. I'm now at like $280 per episode from supporters just helping me out. And I could not be more pleased with the success.
That's wonderful. You mentioned Porcfest. What is Porcfest?
Porcfest is the Porcupine Freedom Festival. It's a yearly libertarian, I hate to use the word convention, but that's kind of what it is. It's kind of a convention / camp out, where this past year, my wife and I were the producers for Porcfest 15 a couple of weeks ago. And we had 250 events over 5 days in the White Mountains of New Hampshire at this campground called Rodger's Campground. And, we had everything from speakers like, we had Eric July, we had Ben Swan, we had Patrick Byrne, the CEO of Overstock, and tons of other speakers. But we also had things like, workshops where you could learn everything about an AR-15 or a newbie shoot, where first time you've ever gone to shoot a gun, to learning how to make, bombs and all different kinds of things. So it's such a weird event. You can't really put a name on it, but it's the best week of my life every year. It's amazing.
That sounds really, really cool. I'd love to go to Porcfest one year. That'd be really fun.
Yeah, you definitely should. My wife and I are probably going to be producing next year as well. And, we defeated, just blew away all of our metrics that we wanted to use for success this year, just blew them away. So I'm kind of concerned about next year because I'm not sure that we can duplicate that, but we're certainly going to give it our best.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Tell me about your path to liberty.
So it started with, I was a neocon conservative who, was cheering the day we went to war in Desert Storm, because that's what I was raised to do. My mother was a neocon conservative, and, I thought that the American way was the way of liberty. And then I realized I didn't really know what liberty meant. And when I really started looking at what liberty meant and, following people like Ron Paul since about 1996, and then, reading some Ayn Rand, finally in the mid-2000s decided, I really don't know what liberty is. Here we have a president who's taking us to war all over the place, and something's got to give. Something has to change because we're not getting real liberty from this, quote, conservative, compassionate president. So between Ayn Rand and Ron Paul, they got me to libertarianism. And then Murray Rothbard was a huge influence to get me to anarchism, and here I am today.
Which Ayn Rand books did you read? I've read Atlas Shrugged and I've read Anthem.
The first one I picked up was Atlas Shrugged, and boy, it's a slog, but I've read it 3 times now. As a matter of fact, I just finished listening to the audiobook for the first time a couple of months ago. The audiobook is really, really good. So I started with Atlas Shrugged and then The Fountainhead, and then I went into to some of her nonfictions, and my favorite is The Virtue of Selfishness. I've read that one probably half a dozen times. Every time I pick that book up, I get something good out of it.
I haven't read The Virtue of Selfishness yet, so I might have to consider that one.
Yeah, definitely check that one out. It's by far my favorite of her nonfictions.
Why did you move to New Hampshire?
So that's a great question, and one that I always enjoy answering because, I spent almost a decade, my wife and I basically took the Libertarian Party of Arkansas, which was a completely dead party. And, when I first became a Libertarian, I thought, well, I need to deal with this through politics, right? Because that's the way you do things in this country. So we joined the Libertarian Party of Arkansas, and it was dead. I mean, literally the convention before we joined the party, there were 8 people at the state convention.
Wow, that's a very small convention.
Yeah. So then my wife and I went to our first Libertarian Party meeting. It was a first district meeting, and it was my wife, myself, and the first district rep that showed up. And I was like, look, okay, if I'm going to get involved in this party, I'm going to make something out of this party. I'm not going to sit here and have a meeting with, one other person and get nothing done. So I started, putting pressure on the party and quickly became the first district rep because that rep was pretty much, sick of it. A year later, I was the chairman of the state party and basically took what was that dead party, got us full ballot access for the first time in state party history. We'd never had full ballot access. We'd had the presidential nominee on the ballot a few times, but never full ballot access. We ran something like 28 candidates that year, got 1 or 2 elected. And then I served 2 terms. My wife then became chair. She served a term. The last convention that my wife and I put together, the last state convention, had over 100 people there. It was almost 120 people. We started at 8 just a few years before and increased that to 120. That year in 2014, it was the largest state convention in the country.
Wow.
So we kicked it into gear and we made things happen. But then when I realized that we were just banging our head against the wall, we were spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 every 2 years to get on the ballot, which puts us at a, huge disadvantage to the R's and D's.
It really does.
Yeah, we've blown all of our money now. And now we're finally on the ballot. Yay. But we have no money to campaign with. We have no money to put behind our candidates. And when I realized we were getting nowhere and electing, constables, which is basically the county dog catcher is what it boils down to. Mm-hmm. We were electing, we were getting people elected, but they were in positions that had no influence and no power. And after banging my head against that wall for several years, I needed a new vehicle. It was about the time I started my podcast. And we were looking to move either to Austin, Texas, where we had lots of great libertarian friends, and it's an amazing city. And we were looking in New Hampshire because I had heard so much about the Free State Project over, a decade or so. And I was able to get a fantastic job up here. They flew me up here to do a job interview. We fell in love with the state. And, 2 days later, they offered me the job. A month later, I was living in New Hampshire.
What value do the Free State Project and societies or groups like it have?
There's a lot of value, and there's a lot of value in different ways with the Free State Project. The thing that I most value personally is the community here. There is nothing like the community here in New Hampshire of libertarians, and more specifically the Free Coast area, which it's technically the Seacoast area of New Hampshire. We have 18 miles of Seacoast, but we lovingly call it the Free Coast, the area that I live in. And the community here is a community of amazing families and kids and entrepreneurs. And, every day this group of people challenges me to be a better me. And not only to be a better me, but to be a more free me. Most of my activism these days, the vast majority, is outside of the system activism. I mean, I was the vice chair of the OPNH for a while, to help out Darryl Perry and a couple of other friends to kind of get it off the ground because they knew I had experience doing that in Arkansas.
Yeah.
But I was not very active in system activism because, again, I've banged my head against that wall so often and so long that I'm sick of it. But I am giving myself more freedom every single day by just living life and saying, I'm done with all of the trappings of politics. I'm done with all of the trappings of what society thinks me and my family should be. And that's true freedom.
It really is, because society seems to give us all these messages of what freedom is. You have conservatives talking about freedom being able to close off borders to free people being able to cross them. And you have liberals who want to give us socialism. Those are not freedom. Those are definitely not freedom. It's more like slavery.
It is. And, that's another thing about being here in New Hampshire is that, I've talked about out of the system activism in the community, but there was some fantastic in-system activism here as well. Now, it's not something that I do, but I certainly appreciate those who do, like Darrell W. Perry running the LPNH, or used to, run the LPNH, and so many Republican Free State Project members getting elected as Republicans. They're libertarian at heart, but the only way to really get elected here is as a Republican or a Democrat. We've had more than 24 Free State Project members elected to the state house in this state. That's huge. Tell me another state where libertarians are consistently getting elected to state office. It's not happening.
No,
but it's happening here.
That's wonderful.
We're making changes. Yeah. And we're making changes in this state. I mean, for crying out loud, the Libertarian Party has 3 elected state representatives themselves. That's more than all of the other states in the country combined. The only other elected state rep is the one, I believe, in Nevada, a state senator. But we have 3 state reps here. So, things are really happening on the ground here in New Hampshire, in system and out of system. And if you're interested in actually being more free, this is without a doubt the best place to be.
What value do cryptocurrencies have in a free society? Don't we have money as it is? Can't we just use gold or silver?
Well, we could. And gold and silver was a great alternative. Porcfest used to run primarily on gold and silver for many years. And so much, trading happened that way. But gold and silver is bulky. It's hard to secure. I mean, obviously somebody can break into your house and break into your stash of gold and silver at any time.
Oh, yeah, they could.
It's hard to carry a bunch in your pocket if you're making a large purchase. And that's where cryptocurrency really shines. I mean, it's fungibility, it's transferability, it's security. It's so much better as a currency than gold and silver. Now, I still have gold and silver. I'm, always going to hold on to that as a store of value. But for day-to-day transactions and day-to-day business, cryptocurrency is where it's at, especially here in New Hampshire. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is about half an hour from me on the seacoast, actually is the highest per capita brick and mortar store Bitcoin operating companies in the world. There are about 20,000 people or so that live in Portsmouth, and there are 28 different stores that accept cryptocurrency for day-to-day business. That's, less than 1 in 1,000, one business per 1,000 people. That's huge. There's no other city even close to that. Keene, New Hampshire is probably second in the world, and they're, they have just as much activism going on in that area. So here in New Hampshire, I can actually take my wife on a date to a nice, really, really nice restaurant called Street in Portsmouth. Then I can take her to the Seacoast Repertory Theater for a theater show afterwards. And then I can take her for dessert at another place and do it all with cryptocurrency. There's not another place in the world you can do that.
That's very true. You can't carry gold and silver across borders without governments wanting to seize it either. Right. So cryptocurrency has that value. You can take it across borders.
Yep. And even if they, and one thing I recommend if you're going across borders with cryptocurrencies is wipe your phone out. You write down your 12-digit code, your 12-word codes, wipe your phone out so they can get no access to your cryptos, and then just load them back up when you get across the border. It's really that simple.
Oh, yeah. Really simple. What would education be like in a free society?
The thing that I say a lot is that, when people ask me questions about, in Anarcho-capitalist, how would this happen and how would that happen? And, of course we get that a lot because people want to know. They're genuinely curious. The best answer is that I don't know. We didn't know 15 years ago what the iPhone would be. We had no idea, but the free market provided it, filled a need that nobody really knew that we had, and has profited tremendously. And of course, been copied by Android and so on and so on. And it's the same way with anything in a free market. We just don't know. But for lack of, or just for intellectual exercise, it would be free market. You could choose how you want to educate your children. You could choose who you want to educate your children. Right now, if I'm in the public school system, I don't get really any choice on that at all. Depending on the geographical location that I live in, that's the school I'm going to go to. And depending on what teachers that school has, those are the teachers my kids are going to get. And that's a shame. That's a crying shame. There's no reason for that. I mean, we had a free market in education in this country for a long time. Or you could choose which tutor you wanted your kid to go to or which schoolhouse. And, frankly, in most areas, because most areas were poor and lightly populated, there weren't a whole lot of choices, but at least there were some choices. Here, we don't have very many at all. Private schools are so darned expensive, especially when you're already paying, way lots of money to put your kid in public school. But now you're putting them in private school, but you're still having to pay that money in your property taxes. It's ridiculous. Yeah. I homeschool my children, my wife and I, and we actually radically unschool our children, or self-directed learning. Our children dictate what they want to learn, and we help them along that path by putting things in their path and things in their way to help them along that process. But our thing is that at some point kids just need to be kids, and we put so much pressure on kids in our society to excel, to learn, to do all of these things. I mean, kids are natural learners. Human beings are natural learners, but especially kids are sponges. I mean, they soak up everything that you pour into them.
Yeah.
And they will naturally learn and naturally pick things up as life happens, especially when they have some say-so over what they want to learn. Nobody knows what my children want to be when they grow up. Nobody knows who they're going to become except for them. And they should have some say in that.
I think kids should have a say in what they want to learn too. I mean, I was educated in the public school system, and I didn't have much choice of what to learn and when to learn. I had to learn math and reading and all that stuff at a certain age. I didn't get to choose what I wanted to learn about.
And that's a shame. I mean, I learned so many things in high school and in public school and even in college that meant nothing to me. I mean, they to this day have never affected anything about my life. They've never improved my life, but I had to do it anyway. I had to spend hours and hours going through those exercises, and it's ridiculous. Today, since my kids are radically unschooled, obviously, higher education is going to be a bit of an issue. But one thing that we are looking at is a company called Praxis, run by Derek McGill, who was one of our speakers at Porcfest this year. And basically, it's a 12-week entrepreneurship course that puts your child or puts your teen, your adult, through this process, and then gets them a job with a company in entrepreneurship. Library, one of the companies that they use, is actually based here in New Hampshire. It's an organization wrapped around content sharing, and I actually know the owner of the company really well. But putting your kids through something like that right out of high school, or right out of, when they're ready for it, they're already so far ahead of all of their peers, and yet they don't have $60, $70, $100,000 in student loan debt, and they're already in the field 12 weeks later, making on average $50,000 a year.
That's really incredible. Impressive. Yeah. And they don't have to worry about debt. They can be upwardly mobile, and they're free to do what they want.
Absolutely. And that sets them up for the rest of their lives so much better than college ever could. Now, there are some things that, because of regulations, college is good for. If you want to be a doctor, if you want to be an attorney, college is pretty much necessary because of the regulations and because of the boards and the licenses and the certifications. But for most other jobs, it's really not. I mean, I've got a degree in information technology, but I learned almost nothing in that degree. I was already working in the field. I was already applying those principles long before I started in college, but I had to have that piece of paper. So I was saddled with student loan debt, wasting my time left and right just for a piece of paper. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And oftentimes people get sucked into this whole system of higher education because they think that, this piece of paper is going to grant me all sorts of wonderful jobs, when in reality, the market's become so saturated with these papers that it's become valueless.
Yep, absolutely.
But people with disabilities have more or less opportunities in a free society.
So I would hope, clearly I would hope that they would have better opportunities. But of course, I can't say that. One thing that, government does is, ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and other things like that to hopefully help protect people with disabilities. But does it really? I mean, there's so many studies that show that the ADA is nothing more than a colossal waste of money, a colossal, power grab, forcing businesses to do things that they may or may not want to do anyway, or may do already, but it puts them, the onerous burden on business owners. I think that without the ADA, would businesses still want to cater to people with disabilities? Of course. Why would any business want to limit their ability to attract new customers? I know of very few businesses that would want to do that. As a matter of fact, every business, including the one that I'm running, wants to expand our market. And we're looking, always looking at ways to do that. And one way to do that is to make your business accessible by people with disabilities. And I think that would happen anyway. I mean, people were putting handicap parking and wheelchair ramps and Braille on things long before the government required it. So I think that in an ideal society, at least people would have the choice to do that instead of being saddled with these onerous burdens. I mean, for example, if you run a business, let's say you run a running accessories business, and everything you have is for runners, people with two legs who function, you still have to have wheelchair accessibility into your store.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That makes no sense to me. If I have a store that is focused on the best visual aspects of life, I should not really have to put Braille on my things because it's not for people with that disability. Exactly. And that's just a fact of life. But however, the government still is going to require me to do that.
Now, you mentioned putting Braille on things. The thing that bothers me is they have Braille on an ATM machine for the numbers, but a blind person still cannot use an ATM machine because they can't see the screen. So what's the point of having Braille on the numbers?
Right.
And that's one of the problems with the government overreach is if a bank wants to cater to a blind person, they should ask a blind person what they're going to need for an ATM machine and not just assume that, I put Braille on the numbers, that's good enough.
Right. Because you can touch the numbers doesn't mean anything. I guess if it were an ATM that speaks, but how many of those do that these days? Very few.
Yeah, very few. Yeah. Very few that I've encountered. I always have to have someone read the ATM machine to me. Is there anything else you want to share?
We've talked about New Hampshire, which is, in my opinion, the best place in the world for a libertarian to live. But I want to just impress upon people that because, we've talked about the community, we've talked about the activism, we've talked about the cryptocurrency, but if you are honestly looking for more freedom, there's no better place than New Hampshire. And I consider, I want people to consider it. My biggest issue with the Free State Project and moving to New Hampshire was the cold. I mean, I'm a Southern boy. I was born in, right outside of Memphis, Tennessee, and little bitty West Memphis, Arkansas. And, I was in the hot and humidity all my life. And that's what I supposedly loved or thought I did. I was terrified of snow. I mean, the most snow I ever got was enough to basically blow away with my own breath, pretty much.
Yeah.
That terrified me. But moving up here and realizing that, the snow's not really that big of a deal. It's actually pleasant. You can enjoy the snow. The roads are so quickly taken care of because the infrastructure is here to do that with. And there are easy, quick tools that make you plowing your own driveway efficient. I mean, I bought a John Deere tractor with a snowblower attachment on the front, and I can go through my 200 yards of driveway in an hour and a half or so. It's really not as bad as I was expected to believe. However, I much prefer the weather up here now. We're having a 90 plus degree week here, and it's miserable. But we're only going to get 1 week like that, maybe two this summer. In Arkansas, I'd be having this all summer long, and I would be absolutely miserable. And, I can't handle that heat and humidity much anymore. I much prefer the average temperatures here. The average summer temperatures are in the, high 70s or so, which is just beautiful and perfect.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah, it's gorgeous up here in the summer, and the winters are really not that bad. The great thing about the winters is you can put on a bunch of clothes to warm up. In the summer, you can only take off so much and stay decent. So, I much prefer the winters. And of course, we've got heaters and fires and things like that to keep us warm. And the fires of liberty will keep you warm as well, I promise.
Oh, I'm sure they will.
That's always the biggest gripe that I hear about New Hampshire, but it's easily overcome. And I much prefer the weather here now. Definitely consider New Hampshire if anybody is looking for more freedom in their lives, because I would recommend it for anybody.
How do we as libertarians teach the ideas of liberty better to people?
And that's probably not a question for me to answer because, I don't consider myself a teacher. I consider myself someone who, you listen to my show, you know that it's not really an education platform. It's a gripe session. I'm reaching out not to people who are new libertarians or looking to be libertarians. I'm preaching to the choir. And there's a place for that, of course, I feel, because it strengthens us, it emboldens us, it helps us hone our message. But I'm certainly not the person to be teaching libertarianism. I understand the philosophy very well, and I talk about the philosophy a lot on my show, but not at an instruction level, more of a information level. There are great shows out there who do that sort of thing. It's not my thing.
Thank you so much for joining me, Rodger. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Riley. It's been a pleasure to finally talk to you after, hearing you for years on Free Talk Live. So I really appreciate you having me on.
It's been fun. This concludes episode 73 of Anarcho Agenda. If you like the show and you want to support me on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/crblake86. I also accept cryptocurrencies. And if you're listening to the show and you want to rate the show, you can do that on whatever platform you listen to the show on. You can also find Rodger's show at thelavaflowpod.com. Rodger, I think you also do other shows as well.
Yeah, it's actually thelavaflow.com. So the company that I run is called Pax Libertas Productions, and currently we have 6 different podcasts on there, everything from Anarcho-Christian to One Free Family, which is a peaceful parenting podcast, and even a show about libertarianism and Star Wars called Resist the Empire. But you can check all of those out at paxlibertas.com.
Excellent. Thanks again for joining me, Rodger. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Lava Flow at thelavaflow.com. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now at thelavaflow.com/subscribe. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.